members to the briefing, but they have declined to participate. Nonetheless, the briefing is open to all committee members, and we continue to invite all of our colleagues to participate. As this is not technically an official committee activity, there's no official record for this event, but any member who wishes to share any relevant statement, article, letter, or other item may do so via their personal offices, communications methods. Members must keep their microphones muted unless they're speaking, at which time you need to turn your microphones on and your cameras on. If any members using a telephone on audio only, *6 will unmute and remute your phone. That's *6. If anyone experiences problems connecting during the briefing, please contact the committee's IT director or committee chief clerk to resolve those issues. We'll ask for the clerk to call the roll, and members, please remember to unmute yourself when you respond to the roll call. Jaria?
Chairman Scott?
Present.
Mrs. Davis? Mr. Grijalva? Mr. Courtney? Ms. Fudge? Mr. Sablon? Ms. Wilson? Ms. Bonamici? Mr. Takano?
Mr. Takano is present.
Ms. Adams? Mr. Desaulniers? Mr. Norcross? Ms. Jayapal?
Present.
Mr. Morelli? Ms. Wild? Mr. Harder? Mrs. McBath? Ms. Schreier?
Present.
Ms. Underwood? Mrs. Hayes?
Present.
Ms. Shalala?
Present.
Mr. Levin? Ms. Omar? Mr. Trone? Ms. Stevens? Mrs. Lee? Mrs. Trahan?
Present.
Mr. Castro? Mrs. Fox? Mr. Rowe? Mr. Thompson? Mr. Wahlberg? Mr. Guthrie? Mr. Byrne? Mr. Grothman? Ms. Stefanik? Mr. Allen? Mr. Smucker? Mr. Banks? Mr. Walker? Mr. Comer? Mr. Klein? Mr. Fulcher? Mr. Wright? Mr. Muser? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Keller? Mr. Murphy? Mr. Van Drew? Chairman Scott, this concludes the roll call.
Thank you.
Present.
Hello? Who was that?
Ms. Bonamici is present.
Bonamici, okay, thank you. Thank you. In a moment, we'll hear from our distinguished experts, and after presentations, we'll open the floor for questions. Note that a vote has been called, but it takes, the first vote usually takes the better part of an hour. So hopefully we'll be able to get through the briefing. Members will be recognized as we have in the other briefings, and indicate if you have a question in the chat box. Today's briefing will last an hour, so try to be try to be considerate of your other colleagues, and keep the questions as short as possible. I'll now recognize myself for opening comments. The COVID-19 pandemic has upended the lives of millions of workers, but few have been upended more than the domestic workers in this pandemic, health and financial pandemic and crisis. Each day, domestic workers serve as a lifeline for families across the country. For example, home health aides and personal care assistants provide practical and emotional support that make it possible for millions of older Americans and Americans with disabilities to live healthy and independent lives. Yet in exchange for delivering compassionate care, most of these workers have been subjected to low wages and difficult working conditions since even before the pandemic. Rates of workplace injury for domestic workers are 3 times higher than other professions. Less than 1 in 5 domestic workers is covered under employer-sponsored healthcare plans compared to nearly half the rest of the workforce. And the current median wage for domestic workers is about $12 an hour compared to just under $20 an hour for other U.S. workers. And as a result, a quarter of domestic workers live below the federal poverty line, and more than half are forced to rely on public assistance to cover basic needs. Over 90% of domestic workers are women, 57% are Black, Latino, or Asian Pacific Islander Americans, and a disproportionate share of domestic workers are also immigrant workers of color who've long faced systemic obstacles to fair wages and safe workplaces. Finally, most domestic workers to this day are excluded from core worker protections that the rest of the workforce has benefited from for decades, including basic workplace safety protections, key anti-discrimination laws, and the right to organize and negotiate for better wages and working conditions. Such poor working conditions are unacceptable. They were unacceptable before the pandemic. They're unacceptable now, but they're particularly egregious given the domestic workers are on the front lines of protecting the health and well-being of millions of Americans during this crisis. House Democrats have taken steps to protect domestic workers in the HEROES Act that we passed in May, and the updated package that we introduced earlier this week includes a requirement that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, finally issue an enforceable workplace safety standard that protects workers from COVID-19 infections. But House Democrats have been working since even before the pandemic to provide domestic workers with the respect and compensation that they deserve. Last year, I joined Congresswoman Susie Lee and Senator Tim Kaine to introduce the Direct Creation, Advancement, and Retention of Employment, the CARE Opportunity Act, which invests in creating better career opportunities and working conditions to promote and elevate direct care professionals. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, direct care workforce, particularly home health and personal care aides, is one of the fastest growing sectors in the country and is expected to grow by 41% in the from 2016 to 2026. Filling these jobs and investing in the workforce is crucial for both workers and people who rely on these needed community services. Now, Congresswoman Jayapal has taken the lead in addressing the gaps in labor protections facing domestic workers by introducing the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights Act, which is HR 3760. This bill establishes consistent pay and workplace standards for domestic workers. It is modeled after several state and local ordinances. Today, we're joined by Ajin Poo and Ms. April Verrett to examine the challenges facing home and healthcare workers and discuss policy solutions to provide them with adequate workforce protections. Ms. Poo is based in Chicago, co-founder and executive director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance, nonprofit organization working to bring quality work, dignity, and fairness to the growing numbers of workers who care for individuals who need support and clean homes, the majority of whom are immigrants and women of color. Ms. April Verrett, based in Los Angeles, serves as president of SEIU Local 2015, nation's largest long-term care union, representing more than 385,000 home care and nursing home workers throughout California. She serves as vice president of SEIU International Executive Board and serves on SEIU's Racial Justice Center Organizing Committee and Together We Rise Oversight Committee. So thank you both for being with us. And now we'll call on our witnesses, and first, Ms. Poo.
Thank you so much, Chairman Scott and members of the committee for having us today. It's truly an honor. And it's so important and timely to be holding a briefing on this important topic and giving me the opportunity to speak to the issues. My name again is Ai-jen Poo, and I am the director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And we are the nation's leading voice for dignity and fairness for the 2.2 million domestic workers in the US. We are composed of 73 local affiliate organizations and chapters around the country, and we represent many of the domestic workers who provide crucial assistance every day in private homes, as nannies, as house cleaners, and as home care workers. Their work ensures the safety and independence of older people and people with disabilities, allows parents to work by providing care for their children, and keeps homes clean and safe. It is the work that makes all other work possible. And as the chairman said, domestic workers are overwhelmingly women, over half women of color, and more than a third are immigrants. And this COVID-19 pandemic has made visible what we have known all along, which is that caregiving is what makes our society and our economy function, and it is still persistently devalued. And this devaluation is not an accident. Domestic work has its roots in our nation's history of slavery, segregation, structural racism, and legal exclusion. As many of you know, in the 1930s, domestic workers, which were overwhelmingly Black, were intentionally excluded from the bedrock workplace protections of the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act. And although some of those exclusions have been remedied, most recently through the Department of Labor's 2013 rule change that extended federal overtime and minimum wage protections to nearly 2 million home care workers, many of these exclusions still remain. For example, health and safety protections, protections against employment discrimination, and inclusion in minimum wage and overtime. At the federal level, for example, live-in domestic workers who are privately paid are still excluded from overtime protections. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated all of the existing vulnerabilities of domestic work. But long before the pandemic, domestic workers were earning poverty wages, did not have money to stock up on groceries, had no job security and no safety net. The median annual salary is about $15,980, and 44% of domestic workers fall below the twice poverty line, which is the line that economists believe to be a good indicator when someone cannot make ends meet. Fewer than 1 in 10 domestic workers are covered by employer-provided retirement plans, and just 1 in 5 has health insurance coverage through their job. Coming into the pandemic, 82% of domestic workers did not have a single paid sick day, and many have never had a paid day off in their entire careers. Black women and other women of color who do this work have always cared for our country and are at the center of the coronavirus pandemic, both overrepresented among essential workers and among the first to lose work as the pandemic hit. COVID-19 has forced domestic workers to face impossible choices. The impossible choices of paying rent, putting food on the table, or risking their own or their family's health. Most have struggled to access personal protective equipment, have no childcare for their own children as they continue to work on the front lines caring for their clients' families, and have not received a raise. Other domestic workers were among the first to lose their jobs and income and have been excluded from federal relief packages because of their immigration status or because they work in the informal economy. Financial insecurity, health risks, housing insecurity have been extremely widespread among domestic workers during this pandemic. I've been working alongside domestic workers since 1998, and I have never, in my more than 20 years doing this work, seen the level of crisis currently facing our workforce. As the New York Times Sunday business reporter David Siegel recently reported in his cover story called "House Cleaners Face a Crisis, Generations in the Making," It is a full-blown economic depression for this workforce with enormous implications if we don't address it with courage and focus. One of our members, Lee, for example, is an immigrant home care worker who is in a high-risk age group for COVID-19. She worries constantly about getting sick and has continued working because she has no paid time off and supports her 85-year-old mom and her children back in the Philippines. Earlier this spring, she was exposed to the virus at the assisted living facility where she cares for a 98-year-old woman. The facility did not give her PPE until after the potential exposure. Or Sandra, who lives in New York and has been a house cleaner and a nanny for the past 20 years. Currently, she's working as a nanny Monday through Thursday for 2 children and has to take the train to and from work. She tries to cover herself as much as she can because she knows that the train is a high-risk area, but she needs to keep working to pay for rent and food. She has no access to health insurance, and despite paying taxes, she's excluded from many of the benefits of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and the CARES Act because she is undocumented. The irony is that despite being treated as disposable, the importance of in-home care that domestic workers provide continues to increase in this pandemic. Often home care workers are the only lifeline to the outside world for some of the people most vulnerable to the virus itself, such as older Americans and those with chronic illnesses or disabilities. Parents who are navigating virtual school.
Can you summarize the rest of your remarks real quick because you're a little bit over time already?
Oh, my apologies.
Okay.
I'll just close by saying that the recognition of essential workers in this moment is an unprecedented opportunity to make long overdue investments in our care workforce. We still urgently need the immediate COVID relief that was passed as part of the HEROES Act, including premium pay, food assistance, and direct payments that include the immigrant families in this workforce. The Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, introduced last year by Congresswoman Jayapal, is the first of its kind bill to transform these essential jobs into dignified family-sustaining jobs, long overdue. And the Be Heard Act is a necessary step forward toward preventing the workplace harassment that is prevalent in this industry and so many other sectors of low-wage work. Thank you again for this opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Good, thank you. Ms. Ferret, you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chairman Scott, and thank you so much to the committee for having me. Again, my name is April Verrett, and I am the president of the Service Employees International Union Local 2015 here in California. I also serve as chair of our National Home Care Council. Nationally, SEIU represents more than 740,000 home care workers. Again, thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak today about the home care workforce. Home care workers are essential frontline workers who provide compassionate care that allows our nation's seniors and people with disabilities to live independently at home. They have been hit hard by COVID-19. This pandemic is exposing deep flaws in our long-term care system. The nature of the close personal care home care workers provide increases the chances of spreading and contracting illness. Because the vast majority of home care workers do not have paid sick time, they too often face the choice of going to work sick or taking time off and not getting paid. It creates impossible situations for workers. Home care workers help their clients bathe. They help them eat, take their medication, go to the bathroom, get dressed, get to and from appointments, and other tasks that allow them to live independently and with dignity. In the US, more than 10,000 adults turn 65 every single day. As more people choose to age at home, the home care workforce has become one of the most in-demand occupations in this country. But our country is struggling to meet the demand because home care workers just simply can't afford to stay in the profession. 62% of home care workers are people of color, and 90% of them are women. We've heard this before, but it bears repeating. 62% of home care workers are people of color, and women make up almost 90% of the workforce. With centuries of sexism and racism working against them, many of these workers are still being denied labor rights and basic protections, including the right to join together in a union. Additionally, this largely Black and brown workforce faces chronically low wages and they lack basic benefits. Even now during this pandemic, they don't have affordable health care or paid sick days, and they receive little to no training. These conditions often force home care workers to leave the work they deeply love because they can't afford to care for their own families. And the result is a national turnover rate as high as 60%. In Oregon, Irene Hunt had to make the heart-wrenching decision to be separated from her daughter for over 2 months in order to avoid exposing her daughter and the rest of her family while she cared for clients who were showing symptoms. In Virginia, Joyce Barnes cares for her clients in a senior apartment complex. During the peak of the pandemic, she was given only gloves for protection, no other form of PPE whatsoever. And I have talked to hundreds of working women who are taking money from their own limited wages to buy disinfecting wipes, hand sanitizers, gloves, and masks, the bare minimum of what's required to keep themselves safe. By advocating together with one voice in their union, home care workers have made some strides in some states to secure COVID-19 training, PPE, paid leave, and increased pay during this crisis. But it isn't nearly enough, and it clearly underscores that our long-term care system is simply not sustainable as it is. As Congress looks for ways to provide relief for those on the front line of the pandemic, it's time to make sure that everyone working in this essential profession is respected and protected, that they are paid a living wage, and that they have a seat at the table to advocate for themselves and for their clients. We need to show that this work is valued in our country, and we need a plan to create a new home care infrastructure that meets the needs of an aging country. Medicaid is the largest provider for home care services in our country, and most home care workers receive payments from Medicaid. While it is time that we finally create a long-term care infrastructure in the immediate, as we deal with COVID, we must properly fund state and local governments and Medicaid to make sure, especially during the pandemic, that workers and consumers alike are safe and financially secure. This is why the inclusion of this funding in a COVID-19 relief package is so vital. As I wrap up, I'll say we must expand access to home care services and improve the quality of jobs. It must ensure that workers make a living wage. Workers must have access to affordable health care and paid leave and training. And finally, workers must have the right to join together in a union to support each other and make their voices heard. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank both of our witnesses. And first, with questions, will be the sponsor of the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights, the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and for holding this very, very important briefing for our members. I'd like to thank both Ms. Pooh and Ms. Verrett for being here and for your valuable work. I've been very proud to work alongside domestic worker leaders, from the childcare workers and house cleaners who came to every community meeting at the immigrant rights organization, One America, that I founded and led, to the immigrant domestic workers with whom we did so much when I co-led the We Belong Together coalition with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. As you've heard, domestic workers are overwhelmingly women, and the majority are Black, Latinx, and Asian Pacific Islander. These are the workers who make all other work possible, but are often living without health insurance, adequate pay, or safety on the job. That's why I'm so proud to introduce the Domestic Worker Bill of Rights Act with Senator Kamala Harris, who has been a great champion for this legislation. It is legislation that would treat domestic work with the value and care it deserves and fill in key gaps in employment protections, provide tailored protections for the most vulnerable workers, ensure that federal agencies competently support and protect domestic workers, invest in the stability and expansion of this workforce, and create innovative new industry models to ensure that employers and workers are heard. And I hope that after this briefing, if you are not, to my colleagues, if you're not already on this bill, that you'll consider signing on. Let me start with you, Ms. Pooh. The National Domestic Workers Alliance recently released a Black domestic worker agenda based on interviews and strategy sessions with Black domestic worker leaders. Why is it so important to have an agenda driven by and for Black domestic workers? And can you quickly tell us about some of the key recommendations from the report?
Absolutely. Well, I think that as a profession, this work has always been associated with women, and specifically with women of color. And some of the first domestic workers in this country were Black women who were enslaved. And the history of how this work has improved in its quality over the generations in this country is because of Black women's leadership and organizing and courage and movement building. And that is part of this, that is the core foundation of the work that my organization and our movement has been built on. And to this day, Black women are still disproportionately carrying the work of caring for American families in this country. And we believe that the ways in which Black lives are devalued, the multiple dimensions through which Black lives are devalued in our policy and our culture, do come together in this industry and in the quality of this work. And so if we put the needs, hopes, aspirations, and vision of Black women at the forefront of how we begin to chart forward a path towards solutions, we believe that our solutions will leave no one behind. Some of the key recommendations of the agenda include the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights Act, your legislation, and we thank you so much for being our sponsor and our champion. Universal family care, which is the idea that we should be moving towards a care infrastructure that offers universal access to childcare, long-term services and supports, and paid leave for all working families in this country. Increasing the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, to at least $15 per hour. And in the shorter term, increasing funding for Medicaid. As Ms. Verrett said, there are many, many Black women who are working through Medicaid, who are providing essential services, who are not earning enough to survive. And these are jobs that cannot be outsourced, and they are not going to be automated. These jobs are here to stay, and we have the opportunity to make hundreds of thousands, if not millions of them, good jobs immediately through increasing funding for Medicaid and mandating wage pass-throughs that reach the workers.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, our late great colleague, our champion, John Lewis, when he heard that I was introducing this bill, really went out of his way to say how deeply he felt this was necessary and told me about his mother, who was a domestic worker. President Verrett, your members have been working incredibly hard to ensure the dignity and safety of people who need assistance with activities of daily living. Can you explain more about the Medicaid FMAP rate and why it's so crucial for your members? I just have 17 seconds left, so I'm afraid we're going to be compressed here, but as quickly as you can. Thank you.
I think it's pretty simple. Thanks for the question. You know, states face budget deficits like many have never seen before. It is more important than ever that that enhanced FMAP rate is available to states so that they can continue providing the vital services like home and community-based services that are so important. States and local governments need the support right now more than ever.
That was beautifully done. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair of the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Human Resources, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to my colleague and friend, Congresswoman Jayapal, but thank you to our witnesses for for joining us and for telling these stories. I recently lost my mother just before her 92nd birthday, and I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years with caregivers. Their work is so important, and it's heartbreaking and frankly outrageous that its value is not recognized. And I know as a mother and a policymaker that access to high quality, affordable childcare is fundamental. It's fundamental to the well-being of families, children, and also our economy. The childcare workforce, as we know, is overwhelmingly women, predominantly women of color. And we must make sure that childcare providers and early childhood educators are paid a living wage that reflects the value of their highly skilled work. It is such a good investment. And I've been meeting regularly with parents, childcare providers, educators, and advocates before and during the pandemic to discuss what needs to be done about the childcare crisis. Getting their feedback informed a report that I released about the state of childcare in Oregon and across the nation. We know that childcare providers were already earning near poverty wages pre-COVID, and now they're facing the additional burdens of little or no revenue, lower enrollment, increased cost and time dedicated to cleaning and meeting those important public health guidelines. So more parents may be turning to in-home childcare as an alternative, trying to juggle their lives. So Ms. Pooh, what is the role of domestic childcare workers during the pandemic, and what protections did they need to stay safe in their work?
Thank you so much for the question. So nannies have been essential to us, many families navigating this crisis. And one of the important skills that nannies bring is the ability to support children through their childhood development at every stage, and particularly to provide emotional support. And that emotional support could not be more important than it is right now, as children are trying to navigate and make meaning of this time of uncertainty. Many nannies are being called upon now, in addition to providing the emotional support and nurturing that they were originally providing, they're also serving as online learning supervisors, helping children navigate this uncharted world of online learning at ages that are kindergarten and below even. And so the work has increased. And what we've also found is that the wages have not increased. And in some cases, wages have been depressed. So the provisions, like some of the ones that were in the HEROES Act, which afforded hazard pay for essential workers who continue to provide essential services, as well as many of the provisions in the HEROES Act that would fund childcare, keep these centers open, keep options available, especially to working class families, is really critical. And I think we need to be thinking about economic recovery and where the care workforce can help support, be a real building block towards economic recovery. These are jobs that are job enabling jobs.
Squeeze in one more quick question. Thank you so much, Ms. Pooh. Ms. Verrett, what would the HEROES Act mean to your members, and what would it mean if it didn't pass?
I think what it means if it doesn't pass is easier to answer, quite frankly, because we see, again, our states suffering really in a moment of not knowing what will happen. Right here in California, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to essential programs that the vulnerable in our state depend on will go into effect October 15th. In just a couple of weeks, because our state has not received the crucial support that it needs to continue to provide services. And unfortunately, because our members are low-wage workers, live in underserved communities, they get the double impact, right? Because they don't earn enough money, so that they depend on these programs as well. So many of them are going without pay because they can't do their jobs. And now the safety net that they is going to be frayed even more.
Thank you so much. And as I yield back, just to clarify, the House passed the HEROES Act in May. I expect we will pass another version. We need the Senate to take this up. We know the consequences if they don't will be catastrophic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Takano.
I need to unmute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if our witnesses could comment on why domestic workers were excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Do you have any knowledge of that history? Or have anything to say about it? I mean, if you don't, it's okay, but.
You know, I'm not an expert in history, but I believe that we know that the FLSA and other acts passed during that era were compromises, just like you all have to work to reach compromises in this Congress with this Senate. Those workers were left out simply because white Southerners wouldn't get on the bill without it. And they refused to give Black workers the same rights and protections that the act was providing to white workers. It is a part of our country's legacy and history of deep systemic and structural racism that we are right now, I hope, getting to a different place where we can have honest conversations about it. But the reality is the Congress of this country made decisions based upon race, and we are still dealing and reeling with those decisions today. And this workforce is an example of why millions of workers in this country are left in marginalized situations and not receiving the value and the respect that their work deserves.
Well, thank you. For the folks watching this hearing, I think it's important to understand what it means to be excluded from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Specifically, are they entitled to to be protected by the federal minimum wage? Do you know?
They are, except live-in domestic workers who are paid privately are not protected by overtime protections still to this day. And the only reason why domestic workers are protected at all is because women organized to change the laws. And whether it was the National Domestic Workers Union that was led by Dorothy Bolden from Atlanta, or the incredible work of SEIU over the years, or today, the work that we're all a part of to try to win bills of rights and other protections, any of these changes have all been a result of organizing and building the power of the workforce collectively.
Well, tell me, are they eligible? Do they qualify for overtime pay? Like the number of hours, are they protected by the overtime laws?
So now, and it was not until the Obama administration where some rules were changed to allow some home care workers to receive overtime, but we have had to negotiate state by state with the state programs about how public sector home care workers are dealt with. And so here in California and in other states, we have been able to win overtime protections for these workers, but there are still millions who go without basic rights, access to overtime in many parts of the country.
So what you're telling me is that the overtime part of the Fair Labor Standards Act excluded domestic workers. And so it's on a state-by-state basis that you have to get overtime protections for domestic workers. Is that right?
Those that work in the public sector, but Ajin, you should jump in here too. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that most domestic workers are covered by overtime protections, but it still requires state by state because of the funding streams being limited. It still requires special policies to implement in a way that doesn't cut services.
I see. Now we're talking about publicly funded, but domestic workers that are privately funded or privately employed, how does the law apply to them? How does the FLSA apply to them?
Because of advocacy, many domestic workers are covered by overtime protections. It's live-in domestic workers who are still not protected. So if you're living in with your employer, your overtime hours are not covered by the Fair Labor
So
Standards.
finally, does Ms. Jayapal's bill cover the live-in domestic worker and confer those rights?
Yes, it does. It does.
Wow. Well, thank you for answering my questions. I got to get to the floor and vote. Thank you so much for advocating and for this very vulnerable group of Americans. Thank you so much.
And thank you. If I just can, I know that the Congress member has to go, but I just want to add that this is an example of why we need to look at the entire long-term care system, because the system does not adequately meet the needs of an aging population in this country or the workers within the system. For far too long, we have not paid attention to this work or these workers. And so we don't have the rules, the policies, the protocols in place that appropriately make sure services are there and that workers are protected.
Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me, as chairman of the Veterans Affairs Committee, they're going to expand the caregivers program to pre-1975 veterans tomorrow. We need to have a wide inter-jurisdictional conversation about long-term care and how we're going to meet the silver tsunami and the workforce protections we need to put in place. So I definitely want to work with you. I think this should be a major issue for the next Congress.
Thank you, and that's a good point. The whole idea of personal care assistants, domestic workers, and all that is a major issue that we're going to be addressing. So I appreciate your concern, and we'll certainly follow through. Next, we have Ms. Davis. Is Ms. Davis on? She had gone to vote and is apparently not back yet. Ms. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this briefing, and to Ms. Pooh and Ms. Verrett, thank you for your time and for your commitment to ensuring that domestic workers are treated with the dignity that they deserve. This is a personal topic for me. My mom was a domestic worker. She cleaned other people's homes so I wouldn't have to. She scrubbed floors every day because she believed that education would be my pathway, one that she did not have an opportunity to get. And certainly it has been. But unfortunately, not much has changed since then. My mom passed away in 2015 at age 90. But you see, most domestic workers in the US are still women of color, and they still work for poverty wages. And so when they get to a point where they can retire in older age, then there's a problem in terms of many of these folks living in poverty. Working hard is not enough if you don't make enough. I've always had to say that. But you know, COVID-19 has made these disparities starker, and the need to address them more urgent. Domestic and other frontline workers have either lost their jobs or been forced to decide between making a living and risking their health. So my question, Ms. Verrett, and you've alluded to some of this, but across the country, Americans are coming to terms with the legacy of racism in every facet of American life, and nowhere is that legacy more obvious than in labor. From the original sin of labor to the continuing struggle to ensure that workers of color have the same pay, the same employment opportunities and protections as their counterparts. So can you just speak a little more to how the legacy of racism has impacted the domestic workforce?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for the question. It's evident, right? When you talk about a workforce that is not paid, for the work that it does, the home care industry, as we've heard, is nearly 90% of the workers are women, more than 60% in some cases women of color. 3 in 10 are immigrants. These caregivers do demanding work that requires patience, commitment, compassion, and expertise. It's not a job that just anyone can do. And home care is not seen for what it is. It is not seen as an essential healthcare job. It's historically been devalued as women's work, a direct consequence of the structural racism and sexism that has plagued this workforce for decades. The current system undermines home care workers by denying workers a living wage, affordable health insurance, retirement plans. You spoke about these workers working hard. Well, many of them can't retire because there are no retirement benefits for them to rely on. Many of them are excluded from being able to contribute to Social Security still to this day. And so I think that we need to make sure as we reimagine a system of long-term care, we do it centering the voices of those who have been left out of the conversation. And I fully believe that as our country reckons with our original sin, as you so eloquently said, if we center Black voices, if we listen to Black women and we solve for the issues affecting Black people and Black women, we will solve for all of us.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
As you know, the Department of Labor released a rule last week on independent contractor status under the Fair Labor Standards Act, narrowing who's eligible for the Act's minimum wage and overtime protection. So how would this rule impact vulnerable domestic workers?
I'm very concerned that this rule would give, thank you for the question, Congresswoman. I'm definitely very concerned that this rule would give employers more leeway to misclassify workers and allow them to pay sub-minimum wage and avoid paying overtime, which is why my organization joined a letter asking the Department of Labor to extend the period of notice for comment on this rule. And we are deeply concerned that it will make vulnerable domestic workers more vulnerable.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is Ms. Davis back? Okay.
Got here.
And Susan, could you take over the committee? I've got to go vote and I may not be back before it's over.
Okay.
And I think there may be others. Ms. Trahan has gone to vote. She may be back. And there may be others that ask questions by indicating in the chat box.
Okay. Is there anybody else left in the chat box?
Ms. Trahan has asked a question. I don't know if anybody else.
Oh,
has-
Miss Hayes.
Ms. Hayes. Ms.
And
Hayes.
Ms. Hayes.
No, I can
Okay.
cover. I'm not going to vote, so I don't mind sitting in.
Okay. Why don't you go? You go
Okay,
ahead,
then-
Ms.
then-
Hayes.
Well, she's gonna let them, since she doesn't have to worry about voting, since she's at home. You go, Ms. Davis, go ahead and ask questions and then you'll back to Ms. Hayes.
Okay.
And she'll take over. So
All
thank
right.
you. I want to thank everybody, and if I've got to go vote, I'm going to try to get back, but I doubt if I can get back before it's over. So thank you very
Okay.
much to our witnesses.
Good. Thank you so much. I heard your presentations and they were terrific. You know, we've gotten calls and letters, obviously, from our constituents as well. One of them really is around paid family leave, and I suspect you've probably addressed this. And I wonder if I'm not sure, but you know, is that really the highest priority? I mean, there are so many issues, but I'm wondering if that would be truly one of the highest priorities of being able to realize that. And the other thing is just my astonishment, and I know you all reflected this. I wish people could walk in the shoes of many of our domestic workers and just get a feel for what they go through, for how many things they have to balance in their lives. I mean, we all deal with that to a somewhat, small degree, but nothing in comparison, I think, to what they deal with. And I'm just wondering if there's some way that you feel that we need to do a better job of conveying that. You're out there, working on this all the time. I don't know how they do it, frankly. And I wonder of all that they're dealing with, is paid family leave, is that at the top of the list, or are there other things? And I forgive me because you may likely have dealt with this question already.
I could just start to say that it is an incredibly important issue for domestic workers, absolutely. Many are struggling with, we're hearing stories every day about not being able to take care of sick loved ones of their own, not being able to take time off to take care of their own health. So paid family leave is absolutely critical, as is paid sick time. And many of the measures have carve-outs or minimum numbers of employees in order to be eligible for protections. And I would just really urge for frameworks for paid family leave and for paid sick days that are fully inclusive of workplaces with as little as one employee per workplace, because that's the entire domestic work sector.
Mhm.
Yes,
Ms. Barrett?
Congressmember, I would add, I think a couple of things. One, I think we need to begin having a conversation in this country about what shovel ready means, about what a real economic recovery requires. And I believe, and I know that Ms. Pooh believes this, we need to invest and build a care infrastructure. Caregiving, having someone to adequately care for your children, knowing that your elders are cared for is just as important in making sure Americans can go to work as the roads that get them there. And so I would say we need to begin to change our thinking about infrastructure and shovel ready and the support conditions necessary for our economy to work. I would also invite you and any other member of Congress to walk a day in the shoes of a
Right.
worker. We are right now reaching out to every single member.
Starting early in the morning.
Starting early in the morning. Here in California, we are reaching out to every member of the congressional delegation to have a conversation with them right now about the importance of home care, about the importance of these workers and the work that they do.
Yes, thank you very much. I
Thank you.
really appreciate that. So I'm going to stop there, and Ms. Hayes, please continue with the conversation. The time is yours.
Thank you. I'm trying to say, did Ms. Trahan come back from votes? Or do we have anyone else left in the chat to ask questions? No, I guess it's
I don't-
just,
I just see Ms. Trahan as well. I don't see anybody else. So we'll pick her up if she's able to get back. Why don't you go ahead, Ms. Hazen?
yep.
Ask your questions.
I'm trying to pull up, I'm sorry. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm just going to get right to my questions. I think we've had a lot of background on a lot of these issues. And I think that just like every other industry with COVID, we've revealed all of the cracks that workers face, cracks in delivery of service. And I think we have a unique opportunity to close some of those gaps right now. My question is for Ms. Barrett. How has unionization historically improved compensation, benefits, and the safety of domestic workers? I see this as a much smaller sector. Typically, people are part of a much larger union, but as you just said, oftentimes in these situations, you just have one or two or a small handful of people working. So how has unionization improved some of the outcomes for domestic workers?
Sure, I thank you so much for the question. And I will what we have been able to achieve here in California. Home care workers across the state organized early to support the increases in the minimum wage in our state. We were a part of making sure that the minimum wage was increased in the city and the county of Los Angeles, even though those increases in the minimum wage did not affect the wages of home care workers in the state. But we fought for workers in LA City and LA County to earn a $15 minimum wage because we knew it was not until they earned that minimum wage that home care workers would be able to. And because of the power of the nearly 400,000 home care workers fighting in places like Los Angeles and Oakland, that we made a $15 minimum wage in the state of California real. And now workers in California earn, at least that minimum wage. And if it was not for our organizing, our advocacy, I know that it would not have happened. Similarly, we've spoken before about overtime protections. It took decades of work to move the finally the needle. And now workers in California and other states receive overtime and wait time, and our members are proud of it. Still today, with our work, our members have only been able to win 2 paid sick days a year. And so we will continue to advocate and to raise our voices, but we know it's our collective power and collective fight that has gotten us to where we are today.
Thank you. I think a lot about what's going on with COVID, and I, for many years, worked as a home health aide and was able to do that, you know, just because of the flexibility after my job as a teacher and on weekends. And I imagine there's a lot of people that do that. And I'm just thinking in this COVID era, when I, as a home health aide, I would have to bring in my own gloves and my own masks and my own equipment, which was very different when I worked in a hospital facility where the facility was designed with all of the OSHA protections in place. I would imagine that that's been an issue, especially during COVID. What are some suggestions or things that you think we could do to be helpful to protect domestic workers based on what we've learned from COVID, and make sure that they are not entering an environment that puts them and potentially their families at risk?
You're absolutely right that it is the burden of safety in this environment is falling directly onto the shoulders of the people with the least amount of power in the situation, the domestic workers and the home care workers. And many are being asked to pay out of pocket for transportation to and from work. One of our members has been paying out of pocket for Uber rides to their immune compromised client every single day. And meanwhile, they haven't seen a raise in years. And so the cost and the burden of safety is really falling on the shoulders of this workforce. And I would say if we can pass measures like the HEROES Act that includes hazard pay and PPE, right? We need to do that, absolutely. And I think that our colleagues at SEIU have done a really brilliant thing, which is to create essential worker boards that bring essential workers like home care workers to the table with government and employers to really talk together about what should be the norms and guidelines that define work in this unprecedented time, and make sure that workers have a seat at the table and can call for health and safety protections with the support of our elected officials, right? So measures like that, I think, are a creative interim step as we push for policy change.
Thank you. And I appreciate the shout out to SEIU. I was an SEIU union member for almost 15 years. That was actually the umbrella that I worked under in Connecticut in both nursing homes and as a private duty home health aide. So I'm acutely aware of the work that they do. I think that's all I have. So with that, I don't know if I'm yielding back or adjourning the meeting, because I don't know if we have anyone else.
Yeah, Ms. Hayes, I think what I'm going to do, it doesn't look like some of our colleagues have returned, but I wanted to just give an opportunity to Ms. Pooh, Ms. Barrett, if there's one or two thoughts that you'd like to share and have us take away and have that for the record as we have it today.
Well, again, I really thank you for the opportunity, again, to be with you all today, to speak about this really important work and these really amazing, phenomenal workers. And I want to close with thinking about Kim Ballin. Kim is a home care worker in Ventura County. And Kim told me recently about the 3 surgical masks, the paper masks that are supposed to go into trash after you use them, and that she was taking them home every day and cleaning them with Lysol, because it's all that she could think to do to try to keep herself and her clients as safe as she possibly could. And Kim loves the work that she does. She loves the clients that she cares for. And I think Kim deserves better. She deserves to be able to do the work that she loves and to deliver love and compassion to the seniors that she cares for. And how dare we not provide her with the very basics that she needs to keep herself and her precious clients safe. And so let us think about creating a world together that allows Kim to do this work and to do it safely and to be respected and valued for it.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Pooh?
I want to come back to April's earlier point about our care infrastructure. One of the things that this crisis has revealed to everyone is just how important care infrastructure is. And the backbone of our care infrastructure are the people who do this work every single day. And for too long, we have devalued and divested from our programs that support families to get the care that they need across the lifespan. And we've divested from the workforce that we rely on to care for us, so much so that they can't even take care of their own families doing this work as a profession. I think this is a once in several generations opportunity to invest in our caregiving infrastructure for the 21st century as a first step towards not just economic recovery, but to a thriving economy for the future. These jobs are not going anywhere. We need them to support our growing aging population. They won't be outsourced. They're not going to be automated. And if we can make them good jobs with benefits and union representation, we can bring a whole new generation of workers into the 21st century, just like we did for manufacturing jobs in the 20s and 30s. Those were dangerous, poverty wage jobs that many women of color and immigrant women did, and we turned them into living wage jobs where one generation could do better than the next. That is what we must do with these jobs. And it will not only benefit those workers and their families, but it will enable a whole generation of working age adults to be able to go to work knowing that their loved ones are in good hands. What could be a better economic recovery strategy? This is our chance.
Right. I agree with you. And that really is our challenge, isn't it? Because if we don't take that away from this experience of having basically unmasked the need, then shame on us. It's not an acceptable position. And I see that Chairman Scott has returned from voting, and I was about to close it out, having asked our wonderful presenters to share a minute or two of final thoughts, but we're happy that you're here.
We held it down for you, Mr. Scott.
Well, thank you. I see that the clock was reset, so I figured something was going on. I appreciate your cooperation. I'd like to ask our witnesses simply if they're familiar with the Direct Care Opportunity Act that has been introduced, if they could make some comments about what's in it and why it's needed.
Ms. Verrett, do you want to start, or would you like me to?
Please, Ajahn, go right ahead.
Yes, we are familiar with the act and we are very supportive of it. Thank you for your leadership, Chairman Scott, on that. We think it's very important and put some critical building blocks in place. And we also want to recognize that that training without increased wages and benefits and improved job quality will not alone get us where we need to go. So we think it's a really important step forward. And I just want to underscore the importance of raising wages, offering benefits, and a path to a union for this workforce to really complement the educational opportunities we should also be offering.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we are aware of the bill and we appreciate your leadership on this front. I know that training is extremely important as we think about making sure these workers are on a path to middle-class family-sustaining jobs. Making sure they have appropriate skills and training is a key piece of that. We're really appreciative that you were able to include Taft-Hartley funds as possible partners in delivering the training. We think that's really important and continues to underscore how important worker voice is in how we recreate and reimagine a change in our economy, and making sure workers have a seat at the table in everything that has to determine their future is important. So thank you.
And how would the legislation deal with turnover or worker safety?
You know, as it relates to worker safety, I know that many workers have received very little training around proper infectious control protocols. So if we think about making sure that workers receive that training, it helps keep themselves safer. It helps keep the people that they care for safer. So I think that's a really important point, that workers receive the infectious control and other safety trainings that they need. And in terms of turnover, right, I think if people think that and feel like they have a career path that they are being invested in, that they can learn and grow in their work, it absolutely helps decrease turnover and retains the workforce.
I would just add that I think that the culture surrounding this work is a huge part of the barrier that we must address. The fact that it is still referred to as help as opposed to a real profession is an indication of just how far we have to go to really show this country and the world that this is a group of skilled, talented professionals who are essential to our well-being and have an essential contribution to make to our future. And so I think that measures like yours, really reinforcing training and career pathways, are a part of the culture shift that we need to make around this work.
Thank you. Are there other members that have questions? If not, I want to thank our witnesses for being with us today and for our members for participating. This is an issue that's going to take a long while to really get straight. It's a lot of work that we have to do. There are many bills that are pending, and it's not going to be solved overnight. But you've seen some work in the HEROES Act. You've got other legislation, Ms. Jaffe, and the Direct Care Opportunity Act and others. If you're going to have an increased pay, a lot of people will not be able to afford the services. So there will have to be some kinds of subsidies to make the arithmetic work. But the workers clearly deserve it, and the people who get the services clearly need it. And so we just have to make this work. So I want to express my appreciation to our witnesses and to our members. And with that, if there's no further business to come before the committee is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.